we must remind Barbadians of the threats that loom out there, in particular COVID. And as we said before, we have the threat of monkeypox because that exists in many of our source markets. And there is every possibility that when that happens, then we are threatened by it. So we recommend highly that you keep your distance, wash your hands and sanitize your hands, and wear your mask at this time. This evening we are going to hear from two specialists as we look at the question of type 1 diabetes. A lot of our discussion so far has been about type 2 diabetes. Dr. Michelle Lashley is one of the specialists, and we also have nutritionist Victoria Cox. But let's start off by hearing about the example of a family. And we went into Jackson in St. Michael to hear from this particular family.
So of course we will have the opportunity to share that with you in a matter of moments. So just be reminded that we are also coming to you live online, cbc.bb. We are on YouTube, and of course you're also able to hear the broadcast on The Voice of Barbados. It's a national effort, so every opportunity to share, we're sharing it right here with you. So keep it right here. And as David Ellis just mentioned, you're going to get to hear those personal experiences from that teenager and his mother. He is living with type 1 diabetes.
Christopher Cox. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2018, so I was around third form. And when that happened, it was a surprise, but I wasn't very shaken by it really, because I realized it was just something that I would have to do and something that would be a part of my life. So I just continued to try and do my everyday things while also dealing with the diabetes. I would say
All right, so we will hear much more from Christopher after the break.
Hon, I know you like your rice and pork, but I wish you would eat more vegetables.
Sweetheart, why do you worry so much about what I eat?
I worry because you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. The World Health Organization says that people with NCDs are more likely to become severely ill if they get COVID-19.
What?
And now that you're only working 3 days a week, you're spending more time on the sofa, watching TV, drinking soft drinks.
So how is eating like that going to help me? These times are so stressful. Just let me enjoy myself.
Vegetables are high in vitamins, minerals, and fiber to help maintain your weight and control your blood pressure. A healthy diet helps to keep your immune system strong and protect you from diseases.
I know you really care about my health, hon, and I really appreciate it. Look, I'm going to have some vegetables. Can I have a glass of water, please?
Wait, you wash your hands?
Hello?
Hi, Grace Me.
Hey, Cheryl. Girl, I can't talk to you right now. I'm doing my morning exercise.
Babe, since when is your morning exercise so important?
Since the World Health Organization.
We're back with you. Your health, your action. Remember, a little later in the program, we welcome your questions and comments. You can send those online. You can send them to us via WhatsApp. We will be happy to share those questions with our specialists this evening. So again, you started to hear about young Christopher Cox's story, being diagnosed in third form with type 1 diabetes. We're going to give you the opportunity to hear the full story now from him and his mother, Donna Tull Cox.
Hello, my name is Christopher Cox. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2018, so I was around third form. And when that happened, it was a surprise, but I wasn't very shaken by it really, because I realized it was just something that I would have to do and something that would be a part of my life. So I just continued to try and do my everyday things while also dealing with the diabetes. I would say it changed my life in the fact that I have to travel with my medication constantly. I have to make time to take the medication and take my blood sugar. I have to also watch some of the things I eat, so I can't just like go and get a soda or like go and just eat something and then go about my day. I have to take into accordance how that will affect my blood sugar. So I think there's less like unplanned eating, like just randomly throughout my day. I think that's how it affected my life. I would say it is challenging because sometimes obviously you don't always, it's unplanned, but you just randomly want things. But other than that, I think I've been able to deal with it relatively well.
My name is Donna Cox, and I am the mother of a type 1 diabetic. It has changed my life in terms of being constantly on guard for something to happen. Like Christopher said, everything has to be planned. So we just can't decide we're going to go out. We have to make sure that we know how long we're going to be out for and always have the just in case. Times like this around the hurricane season or even during COVID, it was especially anxiety provoking at certain times, because apart from the planning with what you have, there's always that possibility of there not being what you need on the island when it comes to the insulin. And even if you do have someone that, for example, the power goes out for a while, there's a possibility of having the insulin compromised. And those are some of the things that we have to deal with. But the other part of it is being proud of how my son has been able to deal with this. He's had to go through quite a bit of changes and getting used to things. And as a parent, that's not easy. There were times when we would have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning just to take his blood sugar as a part of the regimen. It's not easy, but it has to be done. There are times when, you know, he wants to be a teenager, and what do teenagers like to do? Sleep in. If he sleeps in and he does not have that blood sugar reading and have this insulin regulated, you know, the fear is that you can go into a coma. So as a parent, you know, it's difficult sometimes dealing with things like that, and you have to find ways. I remember there was one time when I was so adamant that he had to understand it was important to get up at 6, even if you wanted to sleep in after that. I came downstairs and I went online and I looked at a store that was selling black dresses, and I kept it up and then told him when he woke up, when he felt like it, come down here and choose one of these dresses, because when you're dead, you're not going to be able to see me in it. And he's like, what, Mommy, what are you talking about? And, you know, sometimes I had to resort to things like that. And his dad, too, we try very much to support him in what he's doing. And sometimes you have to pull up that extra parenting card, because for other kids, it might just be defiance. But we see it in his case as this could be a life or death situation. So apart from that, we've had no other main challenges. He sticks to his regimen. He takes his insulin. You don't allow me to give you shots, do you? No. Why is that?
Because your eyes are not very well.
Right? So we have our own little jokes and stuff about it. But really and truly, I'm squirmish about needles. And but he has been a real trooper. And his dad and I are very proud of him. He's not here right now because he's doing something else at this point in time, but we stick together, and we even try to adopt a diabetic household where we try not to have things that are outside of the carb count, so that for snacks and everything he could have that. But we also regulate the fact that, yeah, we were a family that We liked our junk food at times. We like our pizza and stuff, and we will facilitate that given the fact that he has his carbs to count and things like that. So we're on board. For us, the cost is, it could be pretty high, pretty hefty. In the beginning, we were told about a pump, an insulin pump, that would be attached to his body, and he would not have to be going to take insulin all the time on his own. But something like that would cost in the region of like $20,000. And right off the bat, although Christopher said he did not want it, he said he didn't, was there a word, didn't want like a cyborg? He didn't want, he said he didn't want that. But you know, $20,000. Now at the same time, the Diabetic Association, they have a very good program where you would adopt a child. And a lot of basic things, the syringes, the strips that are needed, even the machines, those are given to the younger children who are part of the program. They can also get insulin there as well, free of cost. But again, you understand that it's first come, first serve basis. And you know that if you could afford to buy it and somebody else can't, we would defer to the other person that may not be able to afford it. So what we do is, now that he's using the pen, we actually have bearer's notes, and we will go and we will get it wholesale. And so I would get like maybe a 2-month supply or a 3-month supply, and you have to budget for it. No joke, you have to budget for it. But we are able to do that because both my husband and I are working. But if one of the two of us weren't working, it would be much more difficult. But because of how the family is situated, we will have to find a way, because this is a lifetime situation we're going into. Approximate cost every few months for us, for the insulin alone, could run us into about $250, $300. The strips are expensive, and we could buy strips. Strips are like $41.50 for the particular type of machine that we have. But we can get that supplemented through the association if they have the strips for the machine that we want. Then there is also the food that we will have to buy. We want to try and make sure that that we have the right things to eat. And as you know, it is a bit cheaper to buy a pack of corn curls and a soft drink than it is to buy fruit and water. So we have to make a way, and we do that. So like I said, nothing is unplanned. Even going out has to be planned. So we spend about, I would say, 40% of the food budget in things that we're supposed to have. Also included in that would be the snacks that he's supposed to have, because you cannot ignore the snacks. Okay, it's not about losing weight, as you can see. It was difficult for him to put weight back on and keep the weight on. So snacks are very important for that blood sugar to be regulated in between the meals. So it could be anywhere from maybe $200 to $500. I kind of lost track now with inflation, but it's up there. And the salary has not increased. So it's an interesting venture, but it's something that we have to do. I always thought growing up that type 1 diabetes was a genetic thing, that babies were born with it, that one or both of the parents had to contribute to it. And type 2 diabetes was basically a lifestyle thing. But through this experience, we've realized that type 1 diabetes is not necessarily purely genetic. It's culturally happening to children around the world now, and it's almost like a pandemic. There are a number of children who are coming down with it. Their pancreas has just stopped working, and this is after they have been on this earth for a while. Even babies are not necessarily born with it, but I've known of cases where babies between the 12 and 18 months, all of a sudden, their behaviors change, and when they're checked, boom, type 1 diabetes. And those younger children would hardly have had the opportunity for the lifestyle contribution to too much sugar in their system for a diabetic situation to happen. Even in Christopher's case, he's never been a lover of sugar. We've always been very active, and the symptoms that he had, I had an excuse for all of them. You know, I remember he said about 2-3 months before his diagnosis, my legs are hurting me. Oh, is growing pains. Then the week of the diagnosis, he said his eyes were hurting. He never said they were blurry, but he said his eyes were hurting. Then his head was hurting. And the Wednesday that, and he went to school every day because he loved school. The Wednesday morning he put on his school uniform and he went and he got sick. And the bathroom said, oh, you're throwing up? You're not going to school today. Take off your uniform, you're staying home. He said, but I don't. I said, no, you're not going to school like that. And in a very short space of time, by the time he got into the hospital on the Saturday, this boy was under 66 pounds. It's like that. I didn't think something like that could actually happen. Okay? It got to the point where he was delirious, he couldn't walk, and that happened on Saturday. He ended up in ICU. Okay? And for me, a perfectly healthy child, going down that fast, you know, I thought he had stomach flu, so what did I give him between the Wednesday and the Saturday? Ginger ale. Because it's got to be stomach flu. So the eye-opening thing is that the symptoms of the type 1 diabetes that, that people assume could be very varied, and they can happen after different types of ailments. But don't ever discredit anything that your child says. Get it checked out. If it's the legs hurting, the eyes hurting, the head hurting, don't assume that it's something that it may not be.
I would say to just try your best to be your own keeper, because a lot of the time you would have influence from your friends or whatever to have things you shouldn't have, but at the end of the day it is your life, so you should try to make sure that you are in charge of that. Another thing is because a lot of people are scared of needles and things, take your time so you properly understand your your medication. Take it so you understand how you prefer it to be given, so that you feel most comfortable, because again this is a lifetime thing. And try not to see the downsides of it, because that's kind of pointless to just be negative about it all the time, because it's not something that will it's not something where you're gonna be dead in 5 years. It is something you can live long with, as long as you make sure you understand how to manage it properly. So I think the best thing for you is to put your focus into managing it, so that you understand the type of life you want to have.
Hello?
Hi, Grace Me.
Hey, Cheryl. Girl, I can't talk to you right now. I'm doing my morning exercise.
Babe, since when is your morning exercise so important?
Since the World Health Organization say that people with NCDs are more likely to get real sick if they catch COVID-19.
What?
Yes, I'm a diabetic. Plus I put on a little size. So I got to exercise and use up this little bit of energy that I got to keep my blood sugar under control. Plus my doctor says that when I exercise, it will help to keep my immune system strong.
Oh, so God forbid, if you ever get COVID, you have a better chance of recovering faster.
Exactly.
Grace, I never told you that I have high blood pressure. I don't even take the medication properly. I got to join you in your morning exercise or the line dancing. What do you think?
Yes, and I can send you the same routine that I'm doing here now, girl. It's real sweet.
As we look at type 1 diabetes, our specialists this evening are Dr. Michelle Lashley and nutritionist Victoria Cox. Dr. Lashley, first of all, explain for us exactly what is your area of specialty.
I am a pediatrician primarily, and consultant pediatrician at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and I also work with the University of the West Indies. But I specifically manage one of the only public type 1 diabetes clinic that is run through the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So my specialty area specifically is managing the diabetes children, mainly in the public sector through the Queen Elizabeth Hospital at this time.
How big a problem do we have in this regard in Barbados?
If you're speaking about diabetes in childhood, the problem is a little bigger than just type 1 only, because we do have youth who have type 2 diabetes as well. However, the problem is not a huge problem. I run a clinic that probably has in total a cohort of no more than about 50 children. But these are 50 children who all require insulin therapy. And these are children in the public sector. We have a registry that it's still not entirely complete, but we're trying to register all children and all adults who have type 1 diabetes, because as you're probably aware, the problem of type 1 or diabetes of youth generally is definitely much smaller in number than the problem of type 2 diabetes, or diabetes that people call diabetes of adults. But it is frightening because, as you heard with Christopher just now, this is a for life situation. And in our clinic, we have children who started off with diabetes as young as just under 1 year of age. So this is their whole life ahead of them that they have to manage diabetes with insulin, with special management of how they eat and how they exercise and how they manage their blood sugars. So it is a lifelong issue. And it's not a lifestyle issue. So you can't just change how you eat and everything is great. This is a very delicate balance of managing a blood sugar that responds to everything they put into their body, as well as blood sugars that respond to stress and eating and menstrual cycles as they become teenagers. So it's a very complex issue that we have to deal with. So even though there are smaller numbers than you might anticipate for diabetes in general, it is quite an intensive issue to deal with across the board.
Listening to Christopher's mother, she suggested that there has been something of an explosion in type 1 diabetes around the world. And whereas she thought that it was genetic, she's suggesting that perhaps other factors are responsible for this apparent increase. What are you noticing in your research?
Well, there is definitely a genetic component that has to do with type 1 diabetes. Most persons have an underlying genetic predisposition, but the presentation of type 1 diabetes is often an environmental trigger. And some of these environmental triggers are viruses. So to give you an example, there was a slight increase in numbers coming around the COVID pandemic, not necessarily only here in Barbados. We had a few more cases than we might normally have expected, but worldwide. And so there is this trigger that seems to make the person who is predisposed genetically then develop these antibodies, which are factors against their own body organ, which is the pancreas, to work against itself. So these antibodies are formed usually as a trigger from some illness, and the most common is a viral illness. So you might hear someone talk about that they had a gastric illness, like the same stomach flu, and then they develop diabetes, or it might be a respiratory illness. But the biggest one that we have been seeing in the last couple of years has been the higher number of type 1 diabetes children and adolescents who have kind of come to the forefront, mainly because of their interaction with the new viruses in the market, with COVID obviously being our most talked about and most prevalent during this last 2 years. So there is a genetic interplay with a trigger, and this is how type 1 diabetes seems to evolve.
Cassandra?
Christopher had mentioned something about his legs hurting, and his mom mentioned his legs. Is this something that is a common occurrence, or is every case peculiar?
Every case is peculiar, and that symptom he had might have been either related to an illness at the time, so he might have had some kind of underlying illness that gave him leg pain, and that's what might have been his trigger. Or he was tiring easily. He may have lost some weight that mom didn't recognize initially. And so that is a very non-specific symptom, but it's not peculiar to diabetes particularly. Okay. The commoner symptoms would be the child who is running to the bathroom more often, drinking a lot more frequently, and maybe even losing weight, which they seem to be unintentional. So someone who was, their uniform is fitting quite neatly at the beginning of the term, and it seems to be hanging off of them a bit, and they say, well, I'm feeling okay. But when you check with them, they have actually getting up in the night a couple times to go to the bathroom, and they're drinking lots more water without even being asked. Those are the most common symptoms of the presentations of type 1 diabetes.
Okay, all right. We are going to pause at this point in time. We're going to take a break for lotteries, but we will be back to talk some more about living with type 1 diabetes.
Han, I know you like your rice and pork, but I wish you would eat more vegetables.
Sweetheart, why do you worry so much about what I eat?
I worry because you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. The World Health Organization says that people with NCDs are more likely to become severely ill if they get COVID-19.
What?
And now that you're only working 3 days a week, you're spending more time on the sofa, watching TV, drinking soft drinks.
So how is eating like that going to help me? These times are so stressful. Just let me enjoy myself.
Vegetables are high in vitamins, minerals, and fiber to help maintain your weight and control your blood pressure. A healthy diet helps to keep your immune system strong and protect you from diseases.
I know you really care about my health, Han, and I really appreciate it. Look, I'm going to have some vegetables. Can I have a glass of water, please?
Wait, you wash your hands?
Hello?
Hi, Grace Me.
Hey, Cheryl. Girl, I can't talk to you right now. I'm doing my morning exercise.
Since when is your morning exercise so important?
Since the World Health Organization say that people with NCDs are more likely to get real sick if they catch COVID-19.
What?
Yes, you know I'm a diabetic. Plus I put on a little size. So I got to exercise and use up this little bit of energy that I got to keep my blood sugar under control. Plus my doctor said that when I exercise, it will help to keep my immune system strong.
Oh, so God forbid, if you ever get COVID, you have a better chance of recovering faster.
Exactly.
Grace, I never told you that I have high blood pressure. I don't even take the medication properly. I looking got to join you in your morning soccer size or the line dancing. What do you think?
Yes, and I can send you the same routine that I'm doing here now, girl. It's real sweet.
Han, I know you like your rice and pork, but I wish you would eat more vegetables.
Sweetheart, why do you worry so much about what I eat?
I worry because you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. The World Health Organization says that people with NCDs are more likely to become severely ill if they get COVID-19.
What?
And now that you're only working 3 days a week, you're spending more time on the sofa, watching TV, drinking soft drinks.
So how is eating like that going to help me? These times are so stressful. Just let me enjoy myself.
Vegetables are high in vitamins, minerals, and fiber to help maintain your weight and control your blood pressure. A healthy diet helps to keep your immune system strong and protect you from diseases.
I know you really care about my health, Han, and I really appreciate it. Look, I'm going to have some vegetables. Can I have a glass of water, please?
Wait, you wash your hands?
Hello?
Hi, Grace Me.
Hey, Cheryl. Girl, I can't talk to you right now. I'm doing my morning exercise.
Since when is your morning exercise so important?
Since the World Health Organization say that people with NCDs are more likely to get real sick if they catch COVID-19.
What?
Yes, you know I'm a diabetic. Plus I put on a little size. So I got to exercise and use up this little bit of energy that I got to keep my blood sugar under control. Plus my doctor said that when I exercise, it will help to keep my immune system strong.
Oh, so God forbid, If you ever get COVID, you have a better chance of recovering faster.
Exactly.
Grace, I never told you that I have high blood pressure. I don't even take the medication properly. I looking got to join you in your morning soccer exercise or the line dancing. What do you think?
Yes, and I can send you the same routine that I'm doing here now, girl. It's real sweet.
Welcome back to Your Health, Your Action, and this evening's program has been focusing on living with type 1 diabetes. We heard the story of a teenager and how he's had to adjust his life, and also how the family by extension has to adjust. And one of the things that came up there and has come up as we've had these various discussions that impact health would be the cost. And so at this point, I would like to welcome our dietitian, Victoria Cox, to the conversation. Good evening to you. Great to have you with us. So let's talk about doing it right. We keep hearing how much cheaper it is to buy the things that are not so good for us. And as a diabetic, like she said, she pointed out that, you know, in terms of managing Christopher's diet and getting the things that are necessary, the cost can rack up. And I want you to give the best advice possible from the dietitian's perspective.
Yes, I mean, of course, cost is always going to be something on the forefront when you're talking about healthy eating, not just in the context of diabetes, but just in general. Mm-hmm. And as much as, you know, of course, I would encourage everyone, including anyone living with type 1 diabetes, to eat healthily. If I'm being completely honest, I would almost say there's so much involved in managing your blood sugars through your diet when it comes specifically to type 1 diabetes that in many cases my initial conversations are not even around eating this extremely healthy diet. It's more just around managing your blood sugars as it relates to your carbohydrates, and then trying to get into, okay, now let's talk about making sure that what you're eating is nutritious or high quality. But there are a lot of conversations around nutrition that almost have to happen first before you get into what you might think I would be talking to somebody about. So it's a bit different than with type 2 diabetes. I would more quickly jump into the conversation of, okay, healthy diet, yes, you know, the traditional fruits and vegetables and all that, what you would think I would be speaking about, which of course is what's going to get expensive. But with type 1 diabetes, the conversation tends to start a little bit differently.
Well, let's share exactly how differently it gets started. What are some of those things, whether hard things or not, that you have to say to that person living with type 1 diabetes?
So it's going to ultimately start off with understanding how food is going to affect your blood sugar. And primarily that means getting very familiar with the food group of carbohydrates, because ultimately in type 1 diabetes, you know, that person's body is not producing any insulin at all, which means that any carbohydrate containing food that they eat is going to be sending up their blood sugar. And so as Christopher was talking about, everything is very planned, because essentially you have to, or what I would help somebody do is get to the point where they can look at any given meal and eyeball and assess how many grams of carbohydrate they're about to eat before they eat it, so that they know how much insulin to take, so that when they eat this meal or snack or whatever it may be, their blood sugar is not going to go sky high. So it is it's a skill, and a very involved skill, and it all starts with really understanding what carbohydrates even are. I mean, it's a really big food group, and then beginning to get into what we call carbohydrate counting.
This raises the question, though, of the kind of support that is available for the average person out there. Middle-class family could do better in terms of going for private assistance. But for the person who falls below that level, where are the services? Where do they turn?
So, I mean, in the public sector, I mean, as Dr. Lashley mentioned, there is the pediatric clinic at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And so they have, you know, the specialist pediatricians and doctors such as herself and diabetes specialist nurses, those services that are available at the hospital. But absolutely, it's a very valid question because it is an extremely involved condition, and having support in the healthcare sector, just having family support, of course, it makes a huge difference. Thankfully, we do have some programs. As Dr. Lashley mentioned, there's the Type 1 Diabetes Registry, and it's through that registry, that charity, that I'm often able to work with clients referred through that program, typically slightly older children, as maybe they're moving into adolescence, and they'll no longer be in the pediatric clinic at the hospital. But the Diabetes Association is also a great support, as Christopher's mom would have mentioned, as far as providing insulin and syringes. So people are kind of having to grab support from a variety of places, and it's not easy because, like I said, there's a lot that goes into the management of type 1 diabetes.
The question of life expectancy is also one that looms large in the minds of people who may be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And then there's also the question of the checks that you have to do on your eyes and those other types of checks that are so necessary. Is it more frequent among people who are type 1 diabetics?
Dr. Lashley may better answer that question than I, but of course you have to take things into consideration from a much younger age, as you mentioned, whether it comes to retinal screening, having frequent blood tests done as far as kidney function, of course, the blood tests that assess your average blood sugar level, so your HbA1c. There are a lot of things that you need to keep an eye on, of course, because high blood sugars elevated blood sugars for a prolonged period of time can do a lot of damage. And if these individuals are being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes from the time that they're a child, it's just a much longer period of time of their life where they are managing this condition, as opposed to somebody diagnosed with type 2 diabetes much later in life. So I would imagine that the recommendations, are a lot more frequent as it comes to certain types of screening, and there is going to be a lot of time spent, in various clinics and appointments. I mean, even just as from a nutrition perspective, as a dietitian, I will see some of our type 1 diabetes clients, especially in the beginning, every few weeks. There's a lot of contact happening.
Well, I suppose Dr. Lashley could also respond to that particular question as well.
Yes, I just want to pick up to where Victoria left off a little bit, that you have to realize that the number of years of of high blood sugars rather, within your system does influence how your organs function. So our general rule of thumb is anyone who's had diabetes at least 5 years should be regularly screened. For the children, you can imagine that if you are diagnosed at age 1 or 2, that screening starts as early as 7 or 8 years of age. So what we generally do is we get people accustomed to screening from the time of their diagnosis. So every year through the hospital ophthalmic clinic, we do retinal screening. And then as they get older, we also have the screening program at the Maria Holder Diabetes Center that is becoming a little bit more well known. And this is going to be open a bit more to the public and certainly for older persons as well too. We do screening for making sure that they understand what foot care means from as early as their diagnosis, because even though it may take 10 years before you may have a problem with wounds or cuts on your feet, if you're not accustomed to doing this from the beginning of your diagnosis, then it becomes a little bit more intense and unusual for you to be able to think about screening and looking at your feet and watching your toes and managing your nails and so forth. So in childhood, we find that the complications do not present themselves often in childhood. the presentation of complications often occurs over 10 years after your diagnosis. And that often puts that child into adolescence or in early adulthood.
Okay.
And I think David had asked something about life expectancy. The life expectancy of a well-managed type 1 diabetic is virtually the same as any other person who is keeping themselves in good health. There are obviously risks going forward, meaning that they are at higher risk of having cardiac complications and kidney complications, but these complication risks are completely dependent on how well you manage your diabetes. So a well-managed diabetic should have as good a life expectancy as any other adult going. And I think our life expectancy now in this country is closer to 80 than to 70. We used to be called 70, but our general life expectancy is about 80. And unfortunately, 30, 40 years ago, before we understood about how these complications occur so quickly, we did have a lower life expectancy with a type 1 diabetic probably having, complications in the early 30s and 40s. But these days, I think we have a better perspective, and we expect that our well-managed diabetics will go on to have a long, healthy life.
Well, having heard you say that, it also makes me wonder about young diabetics who may be athletes and how it impacts that and whether it changes their ability to properly do that. I also want to talk with you about different methods of dispensing or taking insulin, but we have to take a quick break. We will come back and ask more of that. We'll be back.
Hon, I know you like your rice and pork, but I wish you would eat more vegetables.
Sweetheart, why do you worry so much about what I eat?
I worry because you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. The World Health Organization says that people with NCDs are more likely to become severely ill if they get COVID-19.
What?
And now that you're only working 3 days a week, you're spending more time on the sofa, watching TV, drinking soft drinks.
So how is eating like that going to help me? These times are so stressful. Just let me enjoy myself.
Vegetables are high in vitamins, minerals, and fiber to help maintain your weight and control your blood pressure. A healthy diet helps to keep your immune system strong and protect you from diseases.
I know you really care about my health, hon, and I really appreciate it. Look, I'm going to have some vegetables. Can I have a glass of water, please?
Wait, you wash your hands?
Hello?
Hi, Grace Me.
Hey, Cheryl. Girl, I can't talk to you right now. I'm doing my morning exercise.
Since when is your morning exercise so important?
Since the World Health Organization say that people with NCDs are more likely to get real sick if they catch COVID-19.
What?
Yes, you know I'm a diabetic. Plus I put on a little size. So I got to exercise and use.
We're back with you, and before we took the break, we were hearing from Dr. Michelle Lashley. She is a specialist when it comes to diabetes in particular, with special focus on the children. And this evening we've been focusing on type 1 diabetes, and we got a personal story and experiences from a parent and a son who is living with type 1 diabetes. So, Dr. Lashley, one of the things I wanted you to talk about would be the various ways that people can receive their insulin. Everybody always thinks the needle, but there are other options, yes?
Yes. Unfortunately, on Barbados at the moment, you do have to use a needle. But those needles are very, very, very tiny. I would suggest that anyone who's even thinking about that the needles are horrendous and long and very scary, just have a tiny look at what a probably a 3 millimeters really looks like on a tape measure, and that's what some of the needle lengths look like. 3 to 4 millimeters for some of them. And if you look at your ruler and think that a centimeter is 1 centimeter is less than half an inch, and a centimeter is 10 millimeters, and you're thinking that this is now half of that, so you're talking about a really, really tiny, very, very thin needle. These are the type of needles that are often present on insulin syringes and sometimes on the insulin pens. There are some intranasal insulins that are now being manufactured. They're not available to us, and they're not available for children yet. But there is a product that is an intranasal insulin that is coming up, probably developed a little bit more in some of the European and North American markets. And we hope that hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have that available for us as well here.
What about the pumps?
So the pumps are needles as well.
Okay.
But it is an indwelling needle. So it's a needle that's placed under the skin, but you don't have to repeatedly puncture while the pump is in place. You do have to know that a pump does not last forever. In other words, your pump supplies will only last for up to possibly 14 to 30 days, depending on the pump that you're using. So you have to replace it, but it will be in place for that period of time. But it is a needle that is under the skin. Okay. So none of these are needleless entirely. We also had another little device in which you put a port on that looked a bit like a pump, but then you injected directly into it. So you were not getting your needle directly to your skin. You're getting it through a little port device that also occurs. So all of these are needle kind of devices. Some of them look a little bit more friendly than the others. The insulin pens are very friendly needle devices and are almost painless. Nothing is painless, obviously, if you've had a prick. But sometimes, like the pumps, as I said, there are devices on the skin that stay in place for up to 30 days for some of them. But they are extremely expensive, the pump devices, and this is not something that our common middle class or lower middle class families can afford, because you're talking about a $20,000 input for start and a $3,000 per month replaceable for the consumables for pumps.
Expensive.
Wow.
As a nutritionist, Victoria Cox, let me ask you about the types of snacks that the type 1 diabetic can have. And we must bear in mind that we also have adults who are in this particular category as well.
Yes. So I suppose the upside is that once somebody properly understands how to do things like carbohydrate count and what we call match their insulin to their carbohydrates, you can eat and enjoy basically all normal foods once you know, like I said, how to take insulin appropriately or how much insulin to take. But what is very common, specifically when it comes to snacking, would be keeping that to a smaller carbohydrate load so that most people can get away without having to take insulin for a snack if it is a small enough snack. That's not a hard and fast rule by any means, because if somebody is really hungry and they want a hefty snack, then, if they are carbohydrate counting and flexible dosing with their insulin, they just, decipher how many units of insulin they may need for that snack. But otherwise, it's like a pretty standard rule of thumb for us to talk about snacks that are about 15 grams of carbohydrate. And sure, we would encourage a healthy snack, so that might be a small portion of fruit, or it could be, a 15-gram carbohydrate granola bar, or yogurt, or whole wheat crackers and peanut butter, but it would involve, as I mentioned, some label reading and some planning. It's not something that you can necessarily just do on the fly, which is sort of what Christopher mentioned.
Yeah, as I listened to you, I was thinking, what can you say to a diabetic, type 1 or type 2? I don't know if we can pair them with this question, but what should they always have in their purse? An apple, a package of with a little Ziploc with like almonds without salt and that kind of thing? What are some of the things, the other things that they might be easily able to get that they should always have in their bag?
I think what you'll probably see most often is that people will walk with something sweet on their person just in case. Probably most often some kind of juice or sweet drink, which would usually be there in case their blood sugar drops too low. So if it's not just a case of being sort of hungry and in the mood for a snack, but rather, if somebody is out and about and they suddenly think that their blood sugar is, they're going hypoglycemic or having low blood sugar at that point, you want a quick acting carbohydrate that is going to move very quickly into the bloodstream. So essentially something like a juice or a sugary beverage. But as far as, then walking with a healthy snack, well, sure, keeping, it's usually some, like a small pack of whole wheat crackers or some kind of high fiber bar or a fruit or something like that for a healthy snack. And as I mentioned, it's probably something that, you read and check the label so you know how many grams of carbohydrate to have, that it contains, But as far as sort of emergency, like I said, that typically ends up being some kind of high sugary beverage if there's a need to suddenly bring the blood sugar back up.
Understood.
The question of the type 1 registry, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and how people in Barbados can be part of it.
Yeah.
That would be for Dr. Lashley.
Yes, I think you wanted me to answer that. Well, the Type 1 Diabetes Registry was formed now just over about 5 years ago. We had a benefactor, Mr. Ian Woosnam, who is a golfer, who actually had a daughter, well, I think he actually had two daughters who had type 1 diabetes. And he was a friend of Dr. Oscar Jordan, who you might have remembered was also an avid golfer and a physician and a diabetes specialist. At that time, he wanted to give something back to diabetes. But because he had type 1 diabetes children of his own, he wanted to barely focus on type 1 diabetes because everyone is talking about diabetes and forgets about this unique group of persons who are diagnosed from early childhood. So the first thing we came up with, and myself and Ms. Crystal Boyer are the founders and managers of the project, we didn't know how many persons really had type 1 diabetes on island. And the registry was formed initially just as a fact-finding mission to find out how many persons had. We put out several flyers, we approached all the doctors, and we tried to get as many of the type 1 diabetes registered with us as part of that first program. We've managed to capture at least 170 persons. Some of that information is still a little bit incomplete. We have names, but we don't have all their details. And I would think that about 2/3 of those were diagnosed in childhood. I do want to tell the audience that type 1 diabetes is not only a childhood disease. Some people are diagnosed in early adulthood. So up to about the age of 30 or 35, you may still have a primary diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. So it is not entirely a childhood disease. So that persons are usually young adults. They're not going to be diagnosed in their 40s and 50s, usually for the first time, but it can be diagnosed as young as, I mean, talk about adult form, as at their 30s. So the first bit of it is to gather the information. We have a registry administration clerk, and we have a website. It's type1diabetes.com, and we do have a site to which you can go on and register yourself. So just put in your information, let us know who you are. The second part of the project has been more to give back and get the needs of the persons with diabetes. So the first part of that project has been to serve the needs of those who are registered. So the registry funds particular kind of tests for type 1 diabetic children in the clinics. And this is the test I think Victoria mentioned about managing your numbers over a 3-month period. It's called hemoglobin A1C. So the registry funds that so that persons coming to clinic can get those numbers right away and get an idea of how well they're managing. We're also managing to fund partially something called a continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs. And the one on island that is more commonly available is called the Freestyle Libre. so that you can measure your blood sugar now without the finger prick. Because remember, you talked about needles giving insulin, but it also pricks to get the blood sugars.
Yeah.
And the Freestyle Libres, I think you might have seen a bit more ads about these coming up now on social media. There's a little patch that's put on, meter is flashed next to it, and you get your blood sugar reading without even a finger prick.
Time has caught up with us, Cassandra. This
It
is
surely
so much to
has.
say. Yes.
Thank you very much.
So we certainly might have to have another conversation related to this. There's never enough time, but your contributions have been invaluable and we certainly appreciate them. So I'd like to extend sincere thanks to Dr. Michelle Lashley, and also thanks to dietitian Victoria Cox, and most of all to Christopher and Donna Cox for sharing their personal experiences as they are living with type 1 diabetes. So thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure again. We hope you'll join us next Wednesday for another Your Health, Your Action. Good night.
Good night.